And so industrialization went backwards, agriculture went backwards, and the emphasis at that time was extraction of minerals and timber. So Ghana had another unfortunate situation, which is that it is minerals rich. Anybody who studies minerals intensive economies would know that only with exceptions, in countries at the very early stages of development, there's a minerals-based development strategy actually makes more progress. In fact, it introduces too much corruption. It moves the state away from a focus on real production that has backward and forward linkages and pushes them into the simple, easy process of extracting oil, extracting minerals, selling them, getting foreign exchange, and running an elite-based system. This is one of the reasons why most mineral-rich economies have failed and they collapsed. So Ghana went into minerals extraction, agriculture declined, industry almost collapsed. Infrastructure did not happen because, in fact, infrastructure was important at that time only to the areas where you could extract these natural resources. Now, 1990s, thereabout, Ethiopia came back to peace. TPLF took over. That 1990s, TPLF. Yeah. Huh? But I'm talking about the whole of Ethiopia. Yeah.
No, it's not called EPRDF.
EPRDF took over. I'm sorry about that. EPRDF took over. And so, but that 1994 period was a very unique period. After nearly 20 years or 25 years of experimenting structural adjustment by the major institutions of the World Bank and its bodies, the International Monetary Fund, the major bilateral agencies, the IMF, the Danes, the USA and its entities, poverty had increased all across the continent. It had become, not only that it wasn't developing, it had become exceedingly poor. Same with Latin America. Poverty and inequality increased. So in the midst of the view that a liberal approach brings about progress, the evidence was that a liberal approach actually produces twin evils: increasing poverty and increasing inequalities. And that affected the aid system generally. So the IMF and the World Bank were no more able to lend enough to large economies even to pay their own bills. And so in the 1990s, they were looking for another solution. In fact, the Japanese and the Chinese protested the model because all of Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, and East Asia were making progress, not implementing the model. The rest of the world, Latin America and Africa, were implementing the liberalization model and going backwards. So the question was, so the Chinese and the Japanese said, no, you have to look at the history and story, of Southeast Asia. So the World Bank was forced to do a report on lessons of transformation from Southeast Asia. They had just published this report just around the time that Ethiopia was re-emerging. It created a bit of a space for the leadership at that time to negotiate better, to create room for the state. But even then, until 2005, Ethiopia was still also a candidate of the same structural adjustment program, although there was a lot more room to invest in social development, the so-called structural adjustment, the human face at that time. Meaning, you could spend a little bit more on education, you could spend a little bit more on healthcare, you could spend a little bit more on rural health, but you could not do more than that because you were constrained by what they considered the macroeconomic constraints. Debt, for example, inflation. So inflation was the most important parameter that provides you with a boundary. And 2005 was a wake-up call. So after 2005, so between the 1990s and 2005, Ethiopia and Ghana converged again around structural adjustment programs. Between 2005 and 2012, Ethiopia and Ghana diverged. So after the wake-up call in 2005, this is where Ethiopia's experience becomes interesting to Africa and the rest of us. Many of us followed it to see what would happen. So let me say a few elements of the things that were happening in Ethiopia that has contributed to a rate of transformation that the rest of the continent has not seen since Mauritius in the early 2000s transformed. South Africa's transformation is purely apartheid driven, is slave labor driven. After South Africa's independence from apartheid, South Africa is stuck in the same mood because it's not deeply transformed. The transformation is not based on the majority of the population. The levels of inequality are so stark that there's no room for South Africa to change, transform, become competitive without creating another racial uprising. So the rest of the continent, other than Mauritius to a large extent, really hasn't made an Egypt to some extent, although Egypt goes back and forth based on the nature of its politics. So Ethiopia's state of transformation has become quite revealing. First, the ability within 10 years to basically fix the roads, have a railway system functioning, construct up to nearly 7,000 kilometers of rail. Ghana has been struggling to construct 100 kilometers of rail in the last 5 years. Nigeria has only managed a Lagos-based rail. There's hardly an African economy that has done infrastructure at the rate that Ethiopia has done, in spite of your terrain problems. Secondly, when you measure industrialization, the rate of industrialization, it is the rate of increase in manufacturing value added. The data that is often reported is growth in industry. Now, for those of you who are involved in measuring economies, industry is a very broad term. It is construction, it is it is minerals, it is extraction. All of that goes into industry. So you have to break down industry into manufacturing. Manufacturing is the main measure for the rate of economic transformation that is capable of self-sustaining itself. And there's no other continent in the country in the last 10, 15 years where the rate of manufacturing value added has been so rapid, including the rate of agriculture value added. Even though agriculture is based almost predominantly on smallholder farms, in spite of what has happened in terms of a few large-scale farms coming in, it is still essentially a smallholder farming economy. Yet productivity has increased much faster than it has in many parts of the country. People often point to Kenya. Kenya's progress is not in the production of food. It is in the production of vegetables for export and flowers for export. So Kenya's main consumer good, food product, is maize for ugali. Kenya is heavily dependent on Uganda and import from Mexico for ugali. So you can have an agricultural system which seems overall to be making progress, but you can't feed yourselves. So maize and maize prices and maize supply becomes a major instrument for politics and tension in the country. This rate of infrastructure development the increase in manufacturing value added. That has set Ethiopia on its way. Whilst the rest of the continent is actually struggling to get agricultural productivity up and going again, and manufacturing up and going again. I came earlier to basically take a look at some farm arrangements. So I've been traveling in Oromia and places like this to see some farm arrangements. I think the progress that has been made is not purely progress based on, progress based on foreign investment. It's progress based on mobilizing the people of Ethiopia. I talked about the terraces. If you had that landscape in my country, I think we probably would starve. But if you have that, the amount of mobilization that has happened to terrace the land reminds me of China. The long walk. When Chairman Mao and his group of soldiers, as they went from one place to the other, mobilized the people to construct the most difficult infrastructure that became the basis for Chinese transformation. The ability to mobilize people, the ability to encourage them to put their own effort that is not calculated simply in terms of direct wage employment, but the mobilization, that is a lesson many of us like to take forward. There were other macroeconomic things which are interesting lessons for the rest of us. One, it is a wise thing that you have not opened your banking sector to the world. Not yet. It is a lesson that the Americans have taught us. It is a lesson that the Chinese have taught us. It's a lesson that even the Europeans taught us until about 20 years ago. When you integrate the financial systems without sufficient productivity and competitiveness in the real economy, it facilitates an integration based on financialization and exposes you entirely to very difficult efforts of managing your exchange rates. Once you do that, your entire economy is focused on generating exchange rate, foreign exchange.